Welcome to Delay the Decay, the podcast for unashamedly ambitious people who want to live longer, lead better, and love deeper, prioritizing what matters most. I'm your host, Dan Hardy, coach, entrepreneur, and former pastor, here to help you build a life of more intentional direction, not perfection, across 5 life domains: spiritual, relational, physical, mental, and financial. Today I'm joined by Dr. Frank J. Infurna. He's Developmental Psychology Area Head and Professor of Psychology at Arizona State University and Director of ASU's Lifespan Development Lab. Frank has helped rewrite the science of midlife, pushing back on the tired midlife crisis narrative and showing midlife as one of the most dynamic, opportunity-rich stages of adult development. His research follows people over time using longitudinal data to understand what's really shaping midlife health, stress, connection, and resilience, and why many U.S. adults appear to be struggling more than their peers abroad. You're going to enjoy our conversation, I know, and I think you'll be challenged by his research as well. Frank, I'm so glad that you're with us today. Welcome to Delay the Decay.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss my research with you and, learn more about your insights on midlife as well.
Very good. What's one discipline or habit in your midlife that you are incorporating lately to help you just live a healthier and more joyful life?
Yeah, I that's a really good question. I think something that, together with my wife and my 2 kids, I'd say in the last 3 to 6 months, we've made it a point to go to church more regularly. And I think we used to go before pandemic, and then we had our first child, and, my wife was really involved in church in undergrad, and she was really immersed in the community and various organizations, and she kind of missed that. And so we found a Lutheran church that's close by, and we try to go probably 1 to 3 times a month. Obviously it depends on the month, but I think it's really been nourishing for us when it comes to establishing social connections with others, and particularly other parents with young kids. So my 2 boys are 6 and 3.5, and so it's good to go there, and it's really well set up for families with young kids. And so after service we chat and just kind of compare notes with other parents, and I feel like that's really been very helpful for us just to get a different mindset and just kind of be somewhere else for a while and be amongst other families with young kids.
Oh, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. As you may know, the what this show is all about, it's to really encourage people who are unashamedly ambitious, who are creators, who are builders, but also they don't want to lose their life. They want to live their life in a prioritized manner, with spiritual being number 1, interestingly enough, and then relational number 2, and then physical, mental, and then financial follows. So it's interesting that you and I found each other. For the audience, you should know this, that I was reading an article a couple weeks ago on midlife crisis, because that's what I do with my life. I read lots of articles on longevity and midlife and just how to live life to the full, particularly between ages of, say, 35 and age 70. And I was so compelled by what I was reading in this article and the research that the author had done and was the hypotheses that he was bringing forward, that I clicked on the author, and it was this man called, his name was Frank Infurna, right here in front of you, and what you're listening to. So I emailed him. I said, "Hey, Frank, Dan Hardy here, Northern Colorado, never heard of me, but I love what you're doing. Would you come on my podcast?" And he graciously, he did a background check on me, and he said, "There's not a chance." No, he said, "Sure, I would." So here we are. So I'm just grateful how the creator of the universe just weaves conversations together, and here we are.
Yeah,
So Frank, thanks
absolutely.
again.
And it makes me wonder how many other people who study midlife you went through before arriving at me. But
No, it was a one and done. Uh, so I want to just start off with the obvious question. It may not it may be rhetorical, but when we talk about midlife,
Mhm.
when is midlife? What? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I'll give you like the academic, I would say, we'd say ages 40 to 65 plus or minus 5 years on either end, and that's more of a convenience for us of like when we're recruiting participants, we just have to have that general age range to kind of get a sense of what we're doing and what our approach is. But in a paper it's now we published 6 years ago, we tried to broaden or expand the definition beyond just thinking about age, but what are the defining features and roles of middle-aged adults that they're finding themselves in? And some of the things that we discussed is you're juggling or balancing multiple roles and responsibilities. So you have a if you're married or you're in a relationship, you're a spouse or partner. If you're a kid, if you have kids, you're a parent. You could be a caregiver to your aging parents. You may be in the workforce, involved in the community on, if part of the church, if you're part of the board or, organizational activities. I think, are you having all of these different responsibilities? And I last year turned 40, and I feel like a couple years before is when I really, thought to myself, okay, it's starting to approach my research is becoming me search, so to speak, because, being a parent and working and just having so many different responsibilities and it's yeah, something to that nature, but also it's a time of transition and thinking. I was Yeah, last year, in turning 40 with my closest childhood friend, I remember when I called him for his birthday, he's like, "Yeah, can you believe like 22 years ago we graduated from high school? Like it was, more than a lifetime ago." And I'm like, "Yeah, tell me about it." And it's those types of things, in addition to, yeah, your body definitely changes as well. So I definitely see it when I work out or if I'm chasing around my kids, the next day, yeah, the body doesn't bounce
Yeah.
back as it used to, like
Hmm. Yeah.
but it's just something you have to take in stride.
So midlife crisis, it can be defined by the age range, but it might be better defined by roles and features. You know,
Right. And like, yeah, when you think about, midlife crisis, Hollywood has definitely had its way with it. And, it's the movie that always comes to mind is American Beauty, with Kevin Spacey and Nat Benning and their characters, how Lester Burnham, he, leaves his job and kind of goes on this crusade of changing his physical appearance and focusing on his health and buying his car, his sports car, but in reality, I mean, of the research that's really been done on it, maybe 10 to 20%. I mean, but it's really hard to put a number on it because, it's really really well made for Hollywood, but when it comes to
mhm.
the realities of it, it's not as frequent as you might think.
Yeah. So so tell me about an expert in midlife. There's probably not too many people out there that are have expertise in this, who write about it, who are passionate about it. How did you even become interested in the subject of midlife um, and the maybe the myth, as we're going to talk about, of the midlife crisis?
Right. Yeah, I mean, in grad school, my real focus was on older adults, so 65 and older, and studying, factors that promote healthy aging. And then as I was graduating grad school and started my postdoc and going into my position here at ASU, I got more and more interested in resilience to adversity, and that kind of broadened the scope or the age range that I was interested in studying. And then it was really about 10 years ago now, I started a data collection project where we followed middle aged adults. We gave them a monthly questionnaire for 2 years. And, the questionnaire involved measures of health, well being, character strengths, but also life events or stressors. And, by chance, we included this open ended response of, did anything else that was stressful happen this month that we didn't ask about? And it was really telling, what people were willing to share. A lot of people talked about, caregiving for their aging parents, how their parents were moving to be closer to them and they hadn't lived near family for a while, and how it was going to be an adjustment for everyone. They talked about financial issues, unexpected expenses, and how their paychecks weren't going as far. And they also talked about medical issues as well and dealing with health insurance companies. And so that study kind of really, you know, flipped the switch in me. It was like, wow, there's a lot happening here, and this is something that I want to pursue further. So it's kind of just snowballed from there of, the data collection project, and now my more recent research is looking at trajectories of health and well-being and cognition in middle-aged adults, not only in the U.S. but in Europe and other parts of the world. And I feel like with each series of studies, it just leads to more and more questions that I want to pursue and try to answer.
Outside of just the pure joy of learning and passing on what you're learning, what's your motivator? Is it what's your root motivation for poking into this?
Wow. Oh, that's deep. I mean, it's something that I'm intrinsically just interested in learning more about. I feel like as a academic, we have this ability, what I do from day to day, it's like I read, write, and I do stats, and it varies on the week and what I'm doing. And so I have that great joy of just kind of learning and trying to kind of answer these questions that pop up. And for me, something that I'm thinking more about doing as well is, getting these findings and just views on aging out to a broader audience. So beyond just sticking to academic journals, and thinking about ways to spread this information. Because when I, talk to other parents or other people that I interact with, they're like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Like, where can I read more about it? So I think that's kind of a future or a current goal that I'm pursuing further, is trying to just spread the word and get that out. And so I'm in the midst of writing a book on midlife, and it should, yeah, I mean, it's still in draft stages, but I would say, definitely sometime in 2027 it should be out. I mean, I'll be taking the time this summer to more hammer out some details and kind of finalize things, but I'm hoping that's kind of one avenue that I'm pursuing, of trying to get this knowledge out so that more and more people can have access to it or just think about it more as well.
Love it. And do you, as you think about your audience for that book, is it more going to be for academia, or you feel like for people that are actually in midlife?
Right. I'm trying for people for midlife. I mean, it's definitely a fun challenge to try to write, break free of this academic writing and try and make it more applicable for a broader audience. So, I mean, my goal is that it would be for audience beyond academia, but also if researchers want to use it for a class or something, that it could also be useful for them. But I think the target goal is to for a broader audience, so it's kind of doesn't just stay within academia, and these ideas can be pursued or it can be out in the broader world.
As I've read some of your research, not at a, I'm not a, I don't know, I'm not even close to thinking on the same level you are. But as I've read it, I mean, I see that you are presenting a problem that you've discovered, and then maybe presenting some remedies to that problem. And it
Right.
seems like the ultimate goal is that you want to see people in midlife flourish. You want to see
Hmm.
them maximize this season.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing is, one part of it is just like getting the word out just so people feel like, oh yeah, that's I exactly know what he's talking about, or that's exactly how I'm feeling. So it's kind of that understanding of like, okay, I'm not the only one who's, you know, having, you know, responsible for caregiving for an aging parent, but also my adult child, came back home because they can't find long-term employment, or, you know, for me being a parent of two young kids, like I often catch myself asking myself, like, was it this stressful for my parents? Like, I don't know. It's just like, so I think trying to get the word out is to know that, yeah, you're not the only one thinking about this or going through this. It's a much broader ordeal that is really transpiring in the world. And, right, I think that then the next level thing is thinking about, okay, what are actual solutions or potential ways that we can not remedy it, but just yeah, make life just a little bit more fulfilling, even at that day to day level. I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind when saying that out loud is whenever people ask me, "Oh, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, living one day at a time." I mean, that's all. It's like we have our long term goals, and I certainly have those, but it's just like each day presents its own kind of adventure sometimes, and you just have to take it and roll with it and kind of go from there. So
Let's talk about the midlife crisis.
mhm.
Yeah, I've heard of a midlife crisis ever since my parents were in midlife.
Right,
What is a midlife crisis, and is it a real thing, or is it a Hollywood generated
right.
myth?
I think the Hollywood version is certainly a myth. When you talk about people, if they were leaving their spouse for someone significantly younger, or buying a red sports car, and if people are buying that extra car, it's probably because they finally have that money to do so. So kids are you're not bankrolling your kids anymore, or they're out of daycare. You have fewer expenses for the time being. Then yeah, you can certainly go out and buy that sports car. But I think one of the I ways of thinking about, or one of the things I'm pitching, at least within my book, is how there's a different type of midlife crisis for middle-aged adults, and it's not situated with right leaving your spouse or which sports car to buy, but it's you know people are attempting to or trying to juggle all of these responsibilities of being a parent, being a spouse, working, being a caregiver, being involved in the community, and trying to maintain their own health, but in the midst of weakened support systems. So whether that be at the highest level of policy, but also just our social support, our network system. So do you have people to go to? Is it you have people to rely on? I think in 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory report, I think called "Parents Under Pressure" or "Parents Under Stress," and when I read it and I told my wife, she's like, "Oh, so we're justified in the stress that we feel from parenting," and I'm like,
We're
"Well,
normal.
yeah, we're normal. This is the new normal." So
Uh,
so yes, we can say there's a midlife crisis, but it's not for Hollywood. I don't know how much that would really make for a movie. I don't know if that script would be sold, but
Hmm.
people dealing with the day-to-day life of being a parent or being caregiving. But there are some shows that kind of hint at that, but you just have to dig and to find them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, you push back in your research, if I'm understanding it right, on that trials and hardships really don't necessarily produce resilience and
hmm
isn't necessarily good for human flourishing in
Right.
midlife. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, gosh, that seems like a lifetime ago. But yeah, a lot of research that I did before really digging into the midlife stuff was looking at resilience and post-traumatic growth. So is adversity really this catalyst for right flourishing and showing these large improvements in say our well-being or our relationships with others? And I mean, the research, it doesn't add up to that. I think there's many flaws in terms of how the research studies were designed, and statistically some things were not justified. So I think, yeah, when we get to thinking about the nuts and bolts of the research wise, yeah, there's certainly some areas that are left to be desired, and I don't think it's as right straightforward as the Kelly Clarkson song either. So,
What's that song?
oh, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Oh, gotcha. So you don't buy that.
No, I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I think it makes for a good narrative, but life isn't as linear as that. So I think that's where it's not something that we can just straightforwardly assume that just that adversity is a catalyst for these improvements and resilience. Um,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We at my age, I'm in my 60s. The some of the wisest, most joyful, resilient people I know are the ones that have overcome some of the
hmm
hardest things in life. And they would have never chose those things. So I'm going to choose
Right.
these things so I could be more resilient. But the reality is that it just seems like the people I know that have the greatest character and the
hmm
most persistence and resilience have had to go through some pretty hard
Right.
things.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking of Hollywood, one show that I'm really enjoying, and it's one of my favorites now that kind of discusses some of these things that we've been, or kind of highlights some of these things, is the show Shrinking. It's on Apple Plus.
Hmm.
Jason Segel's in it, Harrison Ford is in it, and it is focused in on Jason Segel's character, Jimmy. It starts with him a year after he loses his wife, and he's in his mid 40s, has a teenage daughter, and she dies in a car accident with a drunk driver hit her car, and it chronicles kind of his life in the trying to piece together his life in the years thereafter. And right, it does show some good moments, some bad moments, but it just shows how messy life is, but also how this adjustment to this new life, following the death of his wife, how right, there's some good days, there's some bad days, and it also incorporates his neighbors and other people he works with as like this community that is trying to get him through. So I think that's kind of one show that comes to mind where it does a good job of depicting how messy life can be.
You your cross national findings
hmm
suggest that U.S. midlife trends are uniquely troubling.
hmm
What's different about being in midlife in the U.S. compared to being in the midlife in certain
Right.
countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so a bunch of I together with my colleagues, we published several studies showing that middle-aged adults in the U.S. Um, are reporting right elevations in loneliness and depressive symptoms and poor physical and cognitive health, and this is relative to peers in continental and Nordic Europe. And for me, I before moving to Arizona, I lived in Berlin, Germany for 2 years, and seeing kind of the systems that are in place there, life day to day, life is very different. It's in August, kind of people just dispersed and go take their extended vacations with family and just explore and kind of disengage from work. And that's provided for them. I mean, they have access to far more vacation and paid sick days than in the US. They also have much better parental leave when parents can share 14 months of paid time off when they have a child. Also, childcare is subsidized, so you can put money that would, if you're in the US and you have young kids, you're paying money towards childcare, whereas in Germany, you're able to save that money or put it towards housing wherever it may be. And then there are, far more protections when it comes to, say, work and unemployment. So I think when we look at structurally, absolutely, there are these differences in what would constitute life for a middle-aged adult. In addition to, right, healthcare is also universal, whereas here it's mostly tied to your um, employment, and even then, there are, depending on what your deductible is, you may be paying a lot out of pocket. So I think certainly across many different spheres, when it comes to policy, there are big time differences across the nations.
So let me push into that a little bit. What I'll just say, so what?
Right.
How does did your findings? Did you discover that people in those countries that
Hmm.
have those benefits that is
Hmm.
offered, what does it produce in them?
Right.
What are the outcomes, the tangible
Mhm.
outcomes, versus the outcomes that we're receiving here in
Right.
midlife?
Yeah, well, I mean, we looked at right those health and well-being outcomes, but in terms of the reasons why behind these findings, I mean, that's at this point we can only really provide hypotheses or kind of theorize about reasons why, but I think part of it is, just reduced stressors when it comes to parenting, but also financially as well. So knowing, in some of these nations, you even get a monthly allowance if you have children. So just being able to offset some of the financial costs when it comes to having children can be huge. And then also, in nations with parental leave as well, this increases the likelihood of both spouses or both partners remaining in the workforce after having children. So there's that, and for many people, work does bring a sense of purpose, but also identity as well. So if you're having to choose between staying home versus working, when if you work, all that money would just go to childcare anyways, then, those are some decisions that people are certainly having to contend with. So I think it comes with the relational stressors, but also financially as well.
Yeah, and so we keep coming back to stressors. So so stress, if we can alleviate stress, particularly in midlife,
Hmm.
it leads to what? It leads to
I mean,
better
yeah,
relationships, better.
right. I mean, if we can alleviate stress in midlife, I mean, in the long term, there's no shortage of studies showing being in better physical and mental health in midlife is associated with more positive outcomes in old age. So because if you're unhealthy in midlife, you can't just think, well, once I retire, then I'll really focus on my health. Well, maybe too late by then. And also, there's other research showing how if you're in better health in midlife, you're more likely to have more money and more wealth in old age. Because if you're unhealthier in midlife, you may have to take more time off from work, or you may not be as engaged in the workforce as you would have been if you're healthier, and so you're less likely to accumulate more wealth for when you're in retirement. So I think, and also, I mean, one study that I look at, they looked at across 23 nations, and the U.S. was in there along with many other nations in Europe, and they found that in nations that have more paid time off and vacation days provided, and where childcare is less money, percent of wages, that both parents and non-parents are happier. There's this larger discrepancy in nations where childcare is more expensive and fewer paid days time off, where you know, non-parents report higher well-being compared to parents. And one thing that makes me think of is like, yeah, if you're working, say you don't have kids, but a bunch of your colleagues at work and your friends have kids and they're not happy, well, that may transfer to you. You may not want to be around these miserable and stressed out parents. So I think it's not only for the individual, we have to think about it more broadly as a community, as a society, kind of like what are some of these policies and other things doing, not only for individuals, but everyone as a whole.
Yeah. Are most of your solutions and conclusions, are they mostly policy related? Is-
I mean, that's one aspect I'll be writing about in my book, is looking at policy differences, but I'm not naive. I know it's not entirely possible or feasible. There are things that, it would be great if overnight our policies turned into those of like Germany or Sweden, but it's not going to happen. So there are other aspects I am thinking about and researching and writing about, is can individuals do to kind of promote a better midlife for themselves, because yeah, we can't just count on policy. Although I will, with the caveat of, we are in the United States, there are 50 states, and states certainly do differ in the policies that they provide when it comes to investment in education and family leave and so forth. But at the end of the day, you can't just tell someone to move to another state and uproot themselves. So I think certainly people need to focus on what they can control and things that are within their spheres of influence for promoting a better midlife for themselves.
That's good. What impact does loneliness have on happiness in midlife?
I think it's, loneliness, it's right, been kind of thrust into the limelight. And yeah, I mean, it's, being lonely in a crowded room. I think what it comes down to me is like, do you have people and connections or access to people that you can go to in times of need? I mean, and to rely on. And, for me, thinking about friendships and community and loneliness. I mean, growing up, I always played sports through college. And then in I always had friends through my sports teams. And then in grad school, I had my fellow cohort mates that I was going to grad school with as kind of our community and friendship. And it wasn't until, when I moved to Germany, those, first 4 to 6 months were especially lonely, moving to a new country and just trying to find other people to interact with and be friends with. It's making friends in adulthood is tough. Like it's not something you think about, but I used to dread the weekends because during the week I would have I go to the office, interact with fellow people there, but then I was like, oh man, what am I doing this weekend? I just find things to explore on my own, but that can only go so far. And I think when it comes to like midlife now, I think the nature of the whole work dynamic has also changed, and if people are telecommuting more or they're less kind of invested in their colleagues and the office, you would think that would be an initial point of kind of making friends and feeling less lonely, but it doesn't seem like to be the case. And
Yeah.
it's an active process. I mean, social relationships and connection, it takes energy and work.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that being written lately on loneliness. I love what you said, that we can be lonely in a crowd.
Hmm.
It's not just the antidote for loneliness isn't just being with people. It's being in relationship with people where people know you, you know them,
Hmm.
right? Where you can enjoy each other. And just how lack of loneliness, or excuse me, lack of relationship, um,
Hmm.
actually leads to earlier death,
Right.
right? It's
Hmm.
and I know most of your work is psychological, and I'm interested because I haven't dove into that. Most of mine is like I listen to Huberman and Atia and people
Hmm.
that are doing more of the physical aspect of
Right.
longevity. But a lot of what you're talking about is the mindset and the environments
Hmm.
that we live in.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to. And yeah, I'm trying to think like as a way to kind of promote social connection and relationships. I think was it Robert Putnam? He wrote Bowling Alone. It came out in 2000, and last year the New York Times did an in-depth interview with him, and one of his suggestions was, if someone was feeling lonely or lack of social connection, go join a club. Like if it's a run, join a running club. Even if you hate running, who cares? Like it just gives you, access to people around a common goal, and you can interact with them and build a rapport with them. If you're, out in Arizona, a lot of these new developments have playgrounds and community centers and pools and pickleball courts. That's like another way where, even if you know, hate pickleball, hate sports, whatever. Like find some hobby or interest or some group where it meets once a week, but it gives you that kind of connection and the ability to interact with others. Coming back from to the beginning, that's kind of one of the added benefits that I definitely didn't initially realize of going to church more regularly. It's just you see the same people, and it's you're all there in the same context, the same reason, and so it just gives you a safe space to just talk and chat, and that could be done in many a different ways, whether it be a community garden, joining a running club, or joining the gym and going to classes. So yeah, that makes me think of last year a paper came out. It was called it focused on friendships. So not so much acquaintances, and then you have friends, but friendships. And so these are people that you see in specific contexts, right? If you go to the gym at the same time or the same yoga class, you see the same people, and over time you just build up a rapport, and it's a low pressure situation because you're there for the same reason. And I have found that with pick up and drop off for my kids, see the same parents, and we may only chat for 3 or 5 minutes at a time, but over the course of the week, we kind of just build off of our conversation, and so that's it may not seem like a lot, but just being able to compare notes in that situation with other parents is certainly nice, and kind of definitely does a little bit for my well-being and my mental health. And but I
Yeah.
think it's really up to individuals to kind of find, what interests them, try different things. And it obviously depends on where you're living and what you have access to. But, there are possibilities. You just have to kind of try to seek them out.
What's at stake here? What's at stake? I'm busy, got young kids.
Hmm.
I have no friends. I have no friends. I have acquaintances, but what's at stake? To continue living your life alone, without deep relationships. What's at stake?
Oh gosh. I
What's the
mean,
research tell us?
right. I mean, research tells us you're going to be unhealthy and not live as long, right? So I think the initial advisory report from the US Surgeon General, talked about loneliness being the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, when we look at the
Okay.
numbers. But
Wow.
when I think of like, what constitutes a fulfilling life, one that, nourishes your soul, I think of, last month when we met up with some friends at the park. Our friends are the same age. We hadn't seen them in about 3 or 4 weeks, but I don't know. It was just so fulfilling for me to just, we were there for 3 or 4 hours and we just caught up on life. And I was just like, wow, it was such a fulfilling day for me when I reflected back on it at the end of it. So just, there's those little things, it's, feeling grateful and, savoring moments. You may think, oh, what, seems so soft, but it's really, if you build that, day in and day out, it certainly will add to something. And that then makes me think of, Jimmy Valvano, so the former NC State basketball coach. He died of cancer in the early 90s, and during his famous ESPY speech, he talked about if three things you should do every day. He said, laugh, think, and cry. And he was like, if you do that, 7 days a week, you're going to have something special. So it's just those
Hmm.
types of things can, in the moment, they may not seem like much, but over the long term can definitely be fulfilling.
Yeah, it's good. The words of Jimmy V.
Yeah.
What a great man he was. Yeah, yeah. So the science is clear that loneliness leads to ill health. Um, it's clear, and it's also clear that you know from experience. I know from experience is
Hmm.
that even though it's scary at times to like invest in a friendship for
Hmm.
fear of that friendship leaving, like it's fulfilling. It gives great
Hmm.
joy, and it also we can't miss this that it it benefits the other person.
Hmm.
That like us developing friendships isn't just for us,
Right.
but it enlivens them as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak for my friends or the people that we interact with, but I mean, I know for me, it's definitely fills my cup, and I'm, yeah, hoping that's reciprocated because we kind of just, yeah, chat about all things life and just the good and the bad and everything in between.
Yeah, that's so good. So I want to just if you give me liberty on this, say something that you said maybe a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Is that you said like join a running club even if you hate running. I would, and the heart of that is spot on. I would say this, like you already have things that you enjoy. Maybe you're not participating in. You
Right.
have interests. If it's not running, maybe it's lifting weights. If it's not lifting weights, maybe it's yoga. If it's not yoga, maybe it's an art class. But like,
Right.
what is it that you think you would enjoy doing? Where there's going to be other people there that are enjoying the same thing,
Right.
and make it like don't make it torturous. Find something you know you're going to enjoy, and you're going to find people where you can have these Me Too moments. Like,
Right.
oh, you like art? I do too. Oh, you
Yeah.
like to run? I do too. Right? You got
Right. Or
kids?
like,
I do
in
too.
the garden, I like getting my hands dirty. Yeah. There are many,
Yes.
a lot of housing developments, some have community gardens or volunteer on a farm. What was it? Oh, there was, yeah. I mean, yeah, art, it could be anything. You can get inspiration from anything. That makes me think of a show that my wife and I are watching. It's called The Great Pottery Throwdown, and it's mirrored to that of the Great British Baking Show. It is based in Britain, and it's all these hobby pottery artists that come and do challenges, but a lot of we're just watching season one, but many of the contestants were like, yeah, this is like a hobby that I started, in midlife, and like little did I know, a couple of the guys, they're like, yeah, I don't think my wife knew it was going to escalate to this. So it could come in any shape or form. It's just finding something that you enjoy, and right, and it could be done with people, and the bigger bonus if it is, but just there's so many various options out there. Out here in Arizona, there's no shortage of pickleball courts. I mean, yeah,
There
they're
you go.
everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. The you there's a quote that you said that midlife is a stage to optimize. I think that's a direct quote from you. What
Hmm.
what do you mean? It's a stage to optimize.
Yeah, I think part of that comes from the narrative of the midlife crisis, and it's kind of has this negative connotation, or that midlife, you could think has a branding issue, right? If everyone just thinks of the crisis and Hollywood, but when here you are kind of midlife, midpoint in your life. So if you are in your 40s or 50s and even 60s, it can be a time of reflection and editing and thinking, okay, this is the life that I've lived. I've had these experiences. This is where my career is. This is where I am with my family. It's kind of a time where you can be like, all right, how do I envision what's next for me? So kind of detailing your plan, or just thinking about, right, what's next. So I think this is kind of, when I think about it, just talking out loud now and specific to my own career, I feel like I've gone through these cycles when it comes to research of like every like 6 to 8 years, I kind of have dove into this new area, or this next stage for what I want to pursue research wise and what I'm passionate about. But that can certainly be applied to our day to day or everyday life. So it's like, you're right. And coming back to the hobbies and interests, what excites you? What interests you as an adult now? I don't know, but it's something to kind of balance with the responsibilities of, this, knowing that your parents are going to be, their generation is living longer than any previous generation before them. And what does that mean for your own caregiving? And do you have any plans in place, or are those discussions ongoing in terms of what that care would look like, while also balancing what responsibilities you have with, say, your own kids and so forth. So I think it's right, optimize your mind, your body, your well-being, but also kind of thinking about those around you as well. Um,
Yeah. Just reflecting on our conversation, I'm beyond midlife, but I've got parents that are mom and dad, both
mhm,
living in their 90s. I've got children with grandchildren
mhm.
that, even like today, my wife is helping out in a classroom of one of her grandchildren. We're going down to Denver to be with my parents this weekend, but my my kids, by God's grace, and my parents are all really self-functioning. Both
Right.
they have the wherewithal financially, to take care of themselves, that type of thing. And I could just imagine somebody in my position that had parents alive and had kids where there's constant crisis, whether it
Right.
be financial crisis or whatnot, that is a big squeeze that would just potentially suck the joy out of you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, 100%. And I think, I saw it with my parents and their caregiving with um, their parents, my grandparents, and how it was a long process. I mean, from my parents, my grandma, when my grandfather passed away, she still lived at their home, but increasingly, my mom or uncle or my dad would help, take her to the grocery store and, do shopping with her, take her to doctor's appointments, and then do all of her yard work. And then after a while, it got to a point where she couldn't live independently anymore. So then she moved in with my parents. She lived with them for a year and a half, and then, the amount of care that she needed was beyond what my parents could do because my mom was still working at the time. So then they needed to transition her to a nursing home. And I mean, even then, the caregiving remained. My mom would visit almost every day to make sure she was eating. She lived in the nursing home a little over 4 years. And certainly my mom noticed, she was surprised that people made it beyond a year because there were a lot of people who just weren't visited often and, didn't have that family or that came by regularly to make sure that they were still eating and so forth. And so, there's going to be no shortage of those types of scenarios that people are going to be confronting, particularly middle-aged adults. And, the unique thing about the current generations is that, on the other end, if you have kids, they may have left the nest, gone to college, but are having to come back home because, housing, but trying to buy a house, it's not affordable. There are no shortage or no starter homes anymore, really, or, it's very um, not as common. And, the wages don't go as far. A couple weeks ago, I went to the hardware store. I ran into a friend I hadn't seen for a while. We would go to the gym together, and he said he has 4 kids. His 2 older ones are married, and one of them currently lives with his wife and him. And then the other one that's married, he's building a casita for them because they can't, like, they want to buy a house. They want to be fully independent, but it's not affordable for them, even with, jobs. And so I
Yeah.
think that's a
Hmm.
whole nother level of when we think about the sandwich generation of, yeah, it's a big old sandwich. I don't know. I can't think of a funny thing to say
Hmm.
right now, but it's
Yeah,
a next
that's all right.
level sandwich.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, as you think about, young people not being able to afford to buy a house in the same way their parents could,
Right.
the not that long ago, multi-generational living was normal.
Mm-hmm.
In much of Europe, multi-generational living is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder that this financial squeeze, with as expensive as things are, if it may not be a blessing in disguise.
Right.
I know where we live in northern Colorado, Frank, a lot of the builders are building and marketing
Right.
multi-generational homes
Right.
to acknowledge the obvious that it's a necessity.
It is. I mean, and even here in Arizona, there are some builders that are, they are building these homes with these in-law suites, right? So
Yep.
it's kind of manufactured in there. And I mean, I think the builders are acknowledging this, and it's out of necessity that people are having to, right, form these multi-generational households. And, that brings in a whole nother added layer of, right, kind of what's the relationship like amongst the parents and the kids. And like, Yeah, it's quite the interesting dynamic. But I mean, for me, I enjoy the idea of it. I think it's, for me personally, that's just how I grew up. I feel like my grandparents' house was a second home. My brother and I were always there in the summers. My mom would work 2 or 3 days a week. Those other days, we'd be at my grandparents' house. So there certainly are those benefits of having that frequent contact and interaction with across generations. And even now, we have a in-law suite at our house, and yeah, my parents, they visit for extended periods. My in-laws stay there quite a bit as well, and it's I love it because of the bond that they're able to form with my kids. But I can see, but for other families, they may not have that cultural mindset like that of, oh wow, like, oh, I got to live with my parents again, whereas thinking about it at a different level. So yeah, I think it's culturally there's something there, and it could work for more some families versus others, but also I think a lot of it is just out of necessity of like, yeah, I can't afford to, with what the interest rates are like and how much housing just skyrocketed after COVID. I mean, and with wages not keeping up, yeah, it's really a necessity for many people.
I've got just a couple remaining questions for you. One is, if you could just draw up a blueprint for someone in midlife on how to order their life,
Right.
policies aside, living right here
Right.
in the good old USA,
Right.
how can they order their life in a way that will lead towards longevity, and not just
Right.
longevity, but healthy longevity. Yeah,
Yeah, a
blueprint.
lot of things are going in my mind with that. Well, since we're just talking about multi-generational, I'll just start off with just, with your aging parents, like have those tough conversations of kind of planning out what they envision, as they're getting into their 80s and so forth, just having an idea of what expectations they have from you and kind of what their hope is for how they envision their, later years. So I think having plans in place and those conversations so you're on the same page so that if some crisis comes up or some sudden health event, you have a plan in place and you can plan on that. So I think that, and then when it comes to middle-aged adults, I mean, certainly having a community, a sense of connection with others that kind of brings you joy and nourishes your soul. I think, and that can come from so many different avenues when it comes, whether it be joining a gym or being physically active or joining a organization, a running club, or being more involved in the church. So finding some activity or behavior that kind of brings you a sense of joy and meaning and purpose. And I don't know. I mean, another thing that just comes to mind is, doing your best to try to balance it all, but knowing like sometimes you just can't have it all, right? So you just have to, at some points in your life, you're going to have to really invest a lot of time and energy saying it to your family. And as a result, then, you may not, you're still working, but you may not, the career advancement may not be on the table for you, at least now, because, you know, when I'm living it now, just thinking, young kids are a lot of energy demands and a lot of time demands. There's, you know, especially when they're infants, they're sick a lot. So you have to just kind of, and that's something I've, fought with, thinking about, just trying to balance it all and knowing, during this phase, I got to make sure, what's well with my kids, making sure they have, what they need. and then, getting what I can done work wise, but trying to be balanced in it all. And just know that it'll go through different stages. Kids will grow up, and then maybe you'll be able to invest in different areas, and just trying to have that understanding and, notion that, yeah, it's just everything will, yeah, your priorities will certainly shift over the course of your midlife, and just kind of being okay with that.
Well, those are wise words that our priorities shift over time. Be content in today's priorities
Right.
because tomorrow's priorities are going to be different. And I just love what you said about your kids are 3 and 6, right? And
Hmm.
there are probably aspirations you have, whether that be travel, whether that be spending money on certain things that are aspirations for another day because right now your kids are a priority,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I really enjoy my work and what I'm doing. Would it be nice some days to focus more on it? Sure, but it's just I can't. Yeah, for right now, it's, yeah, ensuring my kids, and they are definitely high energy, and they're both boys, and I joke with people that they're feral. They are just wild, crazy, but wouldn't have it on any other way. Um,
Yeah.
but it's just, you just got to take in the little moments. So, like, the past couple of days on the way to drop daycare in school, my youngest, he just, we have the same routine. We go to the same, place. He's like, "Where are we going?" I'm like, "We're going to school." He's like, "Oh yeah, okay." Like, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
"Oh my gosh, you have no worries in the world." Whereas my 6 year old's like, "Are you
Yep.
kidding me? We do this like, don't you know where we are? Like, don't you recognize where we are?" And blah, blah, blah. He's just like, "Okay, yeah, we're going to school right now." Gosh,
That's great.
like,
Oh, kids,
here I am,
you
like,
gotta love
driving,
it.
like, thinking, okay, what's on my plate today? What's going on this weekend? Like, do we have enough plans to keep them busy? And he's just like, where are we going? Like, dude.
There's there's something about that innocent trust with that little 3-year-old. Like he'll go anywhere or do anything Daddy says.
Yeah, he's just like,
Except
okay,
go to
we're
bed on
doing this.
except go to bed on
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hey Frank, I know that your recent study and research and passion has been midlife, but I also know that you started off your journey in thinking more about aging.
Hmm.
Talk to me just a little bit about retirement. What is do you have any findings or have you done any research about the health of people that
Right.
work all their life and then one day, age 60, 65, whatever, boom, put an end
Right.
to it versus those that continue to work at something? Maybe it's not
Right.
their normal job.
Yeah, I mean, retirement, yeah, it's a complex picture, because I think one of the things that comes to mind is just thinking about, why are people retiring, right? If people are retiring early, it could be because they have the money to, or because health wise, they're no longer able to work full time. And I think what I do find, what is observed is just, having something to do, or something to kind of replace that purpose, or that kind of whatever purpose work gave you, or whatever identity it gave you, is trying to find something equivalent or just close to it in retirement, to how you can spend your time. I mean, otherwise, sometimes people go back to work because, they didn't save enough for retirement, or because they were just going crazy. I rem- this randomly, I remember this story of when we were looking for suits for when my wife and I got married. Going to Men's Warehouse, and the guy who was helping me, he was retired. He's like, "Yeah, when I retired, my wife looked at me and said, 'You think you're just gonna sit in the house with me? Like, no, we're gonna go crazy. You got to find something to do.'" So he got a job at Men's Warehouse. So I think, finding something, to a hobby and interest, or something to keep busy with, in retirement. Otherwise, yeah, you're just going to go crazy. You're just going to sit around and, decay or just not remain active. So I feel like when it comes time to that, you need to kind of have a plan. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to retire and that's it. Because
Yeah, that's
that
good.
could be bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe we're all created with a purpose, and that same purpose we were created for is manifest in our midlife, and it's also manifest in our quote retirement years. It looks different. It might have different rhythms,
Right.
but we have purpose. And I love that you use the word decay because the reason that this is called the Delay the Decay podcast is that we're all aging. Whether you're 40 or 68, we're aging, and we're all in some stage of decay. If
Hmm.
we're just honest with it, as morbid as that sounds, but by healthy rhythms, living a prioritized life, we can delay the decay,
Right.
and that is the goal: is to delay the decay as long as we can to be able to enjoy the good gifts that God has given us to be able to help other people flourish.
Hmm.
The and I want to just give it just a bit of a plug here for the prioritized life. I wrote an assessment, a 50 question assessment to help people get a snapshot of how their life is currently prioritized.
Hmm.
The healthy priority, in my opinion, is spiritual, relational, physical, mental, and then
Right.
financial.
Right.
Engaging with our Creator, people that our Creator's put in our life,
Right.
stewarding our body, our mind, and our finances. And that leads to the fulfilled life, that leads to maximum joy. So I wrote this assessment just to have people take an MRI of sorts of where they're at
Right.
and then look for opportunities for growth.
Hmm.
Your research is super compelling to me. I'm grateful that you're doing what you're doing. I look forward to seeing the book and reading it when it comes out. As long as you dumb it down a little bit, like just like gotta
I'll do my best.
take out
That's
some of those
funny.
big words like there's got to be like a when you say longitudinal,
Yeah.
there's got to be like a second grade word for that. So, but yeah, any last words that you just want to encourage people on the podcast today with?
Other than what I've said, I mean, just yeah, finding something that gives you purpose, and just don't underestimate the value of gratitude and savoring those little moments in life. I think that I lately have found myself a lot of just feeling thankful and gracious for the family I have and the upbringing, and for other people maybe they may have other sources for feeling grateful for life, but just finding little moments and being appreciative of what you have ahead of you and what you have can go a long way.
That's golden. That's golden. So be content. Savor the small moments. There's always something to be thankful for, even in the bumps of life. Let's look for those opportunities, and be reminded, Delay Decay audience, that this life is about direction, not perfection. If we're trying to take the next best perfect step, we're never going to take that next step. So, what is it that God's calling you to do to live life to the full and to be able to make other lives, the lives of other people, better? And Frank, thank you. You've made my life better by spending an hour with me here today. And I look forward to connecting with you offline sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'll have many new ideas to pursue now after it. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to Delay the Decay. If today's conversation resonated with you, follow, subscribe, and share it with someone else on the journey. Until next time, keep prioritizing what matters most. And remember, it's about direction, not perfection.